afternoon. We are very excited to welcome all of you to our kickoff of the Waterton Glacier Science and History Week for 2020. I am Tara Carolyn. I am the Director of the Crown of the Continent Research Learning Center here at Glacier National Park, and we've been hosting an annual Science and History Day for 17 years, since 2004, but this is our first time hosting it in a virtual format. And we want to thank you so much for joining us today. And as we dive into the history and science research that characterizes and shapes Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. We would like to begin today by acknowledging that these parks are the traditional homeland of the Siksikaitsitapi, Kootenai, Salish, and Quilispe people. We offer this acknowledgement to recognize the Indigenous peoples' enduring connection to their traditional territories, to observe the history of the land that is currently shared by many peoples, and to recognize this stewardship as a shared responsibility of all those who reside in a territory. Today is the first day of our 4-day webinar series. Each day at noon, we'll be bringing you a special presentation highlighting current research and historical topics related to Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. The Peace Park, which comprises Waterton Lakes National Park in Alberta, Canada, and Glacier National Park in Montana, USA, recognizes the partnership between Parks Canada and the National Park Service and is the first transboundary park in the world. It was designated to promote goodwill and between nations and to underscore the fact that the wilderness transcends political boundaries and that cooperation is required to protect it. This week's event is a testament to the success of that partnership and helps us to convey the shared story of Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. Today, our featured presentation is Restoring Native Fescue Prairie Using Fire and Traditional Ecological Knowledge in Waterton Lakes National Park. It will be presented by Dr. Cristina Eisenberg, who will be joined by Kansie Fox and Monroe Fox. And so bear with me while I introduce all three of our speakers now. Cristina is graduate faculty and outstanding alumna fellow at Oregon State University in the College of Forestry. And as an Indigenous woman scientist, she's the principal investigator on two major projects with the First Nations, the Kenow First Nation in Waterton Lakes and the Kenow Timber Limit, as well as the Native American Fort Belknap Indian community, the Ani and Nakota tribes in Montana. These communities integrate traditional ecological knowledge into ecological restoration. The 5-year program she directs in Fort Belknap is funded by the Bureau of Land Management. She's a Smithsonian Research Associate and former Chief Scientist at Earthwatch Institute. She oversaw a global research program focusing on ecological restoration, social justice for Indigenous peoples, and sustainable natural resources. Cristina has authored numerous books and journal articles and chapters. She lives in Northwest Montana in a remote valley with her husband. Our second speaker, Kansie Fox, is Blackfoot from Kenow Blood Tribes and Dene from the Navajo Nation and was raised on the Blood Reservation. Her father is Richard Fox Jr. and her late mother is Mary Ann Fox. She's blessed with two amazing teenagers, one of which you get to meet today, along with a crazy cat who reside with her in Lethbridge. Kansie Fox is the Environmental Protection Manager with the Blood Tribe Land Management Department on the Blood Reserve. Her work involves communicating with Chief Counsel and the Blood Tribe Community, Kenow Ecosystem Protection Association, the Blackfoot Confederacy, and environmental organizations to protect and sustainably manage tribal lands. Kansie graduated from Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah with a bachelor's degree in conservation biology, completed the National Aboriginal Land Managers Association Professional Development Program, to receive the Professional Lands Management certification. And last but not at all least is Monroe Fox, and she is also from the Kenow Nation from southern Alberta, Canada, and is the daughter of Kansie Fox. At age 16, she attends Chinook High School in Lethbridge. She works as a senior field technician under Christina's projects in Fort Belknap and in Waterton Lakes, and previously worked in Waterton as a community fellow. As a youth, Monroe hopes for her generation to value the environment and give back to it instead of just constant taking from it. As a Kenow member, she aspires for the nation to prioritize learning from the land and making connections to different cultures. And as a citizen of the public, she dreams for the earth to be restored and abundant while we seek to learn along with it. I'd like to thank you all again for joining us today. The presentation will last about 30 minutes and we'll have about 10 minutes for questions afterwards. You can actually go ahead and type your questions in at any time during the presentation, and we'll address the questions at the end. So there should be a question box on your screen. And as a reminder for anyone who would like live captioning, we will be pasting that link in the chat box very shortly. And with all that being said, we're going to turn the presentation over to Cristina now.
Thank you. Okay, I'm seeking to share my screen.
Yes, did it ask to hit yes for share screen?
I am not getting a prompt for that.
Yeah, I'm not getting the drop down.
Sarah, I can move to
Can
get
you share
Cristina. Yeah, I'll share
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Okay. Got it. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can. You're good.
Yeah, okay. And then I'm going to click on the audience view. Okay, so I'm all good to go. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here giving this talk for Science and History Day. I am very grateful to be here and to have the opportunity to talk about traditional ecological knowledge and how it pertains to the science that we've been doing in Waterton. I'll begin by giving you my traditional name, Oki Nisto Anagok, Mistaki Kakatusaki. Hello, my name is Mountain Star Woman. There are three of us speaking. All of us are Native people, and all of us are working in natural resources, as Tara described. And we will start with Monroe Fox. And I will advance the slides. Monroe, are you there? You'll need to unmute your microphone if you're here, Monroe. Dave, can you tell whether Monroe Fox
can you
is
hear
present?
me?
Now
hear
I
me?
can hear you. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
I was muted.
So, okay. All right. So I'm going to advance to your first slide, Monroe, and please start by introducing yourself in Blackfoot.
Okay. I'm Oki Nadanago Anatsika Gakuto Saki. My Indian name is Pretty Star Woman, and my English name is Monroe Fox.
I'm having trouble advancing my slides. My computer controls don't seem to be working to advance them. Can somebody There we go. Okay. All right, Monroe, here's your first slide. And then tell me next slide when you're done.
Okay. The background of this presentation is the Anthropocene. It's the geological approach that began with the Industrial Revolution in the late 17th century, which is basically settler colonialism, policy of a foreign policy seeking to extend or retain its authority over other people or territories to develop or exploit them to benefit the country and help the colonies modernize in terms of colonizers. Next slide.
I'm having trouble advancing my slides.
Yeah, so Cristina, I think what you need to do is actually, right now I'm looking at your toolbar. If you were to just click on the slide itself. Okay.
Okay.
There
Thank
you
you.
go. Yep.
So,
Monroe?
settler colonialism and 1800s dewilding. So the bison, the fire, the elk, and the bears, everything was here on the prairie. But when colonialism came over, were banished, and the bison were decreasing in population from overhunting, and so elk came into abundance and started eating all the vegetation, and so did all the cattle on settlers' land. Next slide. And so on the map to the left is like, it's white and then there's like a red kind of marking on it, and that's all the grassland and shrubland that is here in the northern continent. And on the picture to your right is where the bison ranges were. You can see the overlap how they're connected. Next slide. What is traditional ecological knowledge? There's a little definition right there, and you know it's everywhere from Kenya to Amazon. And this quote by Robin Wall that I would like to share with you is from her book Sweetgrass, and on one of the first chapters is a story about Sky Woman coming to Turtle Island, which is here in North America. And the quote is, "She came here with nothing but a handful of seeds and the slimmest of instructions to use your gifts and dreams for good. The same instructions we all carry." And this is what TK is all about. It's all these instructions that we're using from the plants and animals that we are trying to build reciprocity, social, economical, ecological systems. Next slide. Could you go back one slide to the kinship one?
Oh, there. Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, TK involves sharing and restraint sustained by spiritual beliefs that regard plants and animals as human kin. And there's a quick story that I'm gonna shorten a lot. It's the boy and the buffalo story, and it's about this boy and this buffalo grew up together since they were born, and soon the buffalo was getting too big to like stay with him. So he met the buffalo, saw his tribe, the buffalo, and the buffalo had to choose between his best friend, the boy, or his family, buffalo. And so if either way he chose, he would have become a human or a buffalo, but he chose to be a buffalo because that's who he is. And these relationships of plants and animals are, as human kin, are literally just like that. It's all the stuff we learn from them and what they learn from us. Next slide. This is pretty straightforward. I don't really have anything to add to this one. Next slide. Hi, Kansie.
Kansie, please introduce yourself using your traditional name.
Cristina, I'm going to unmute Kansie right now from the
Okay.
participant list. Can you just tell me her last name?
Fox.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, Kansie,
Right.
can you, we can hear you now. Can you please introduce yourself using your traditional name?
Sure. Okay. Nistawanagog Abetsitabiaki. I'm Kansie Fox, and my Blackfoot name is White Weasel Woman. So I'm going to continue on the discussion about TEK. So there's this huge gap, this difference in the way we view the world, and with TEK and Western science, it comes from these different perspectives of, TEK being more qualitative, where Western science is quantitative. TEK is looking at community data, Western science outside experts data. TEK long duration, Western science short duration, TEK holistic, matriarchal part of daily life, and Western science is the linear, patriarchal, and Aristotelian hypothesis. So basically, there's that gap, and then trying to bridge the two or braid the two is part of what I do and what this project was looking at. For the background, the SER, Society for Ecological Restoration Principles and Standards, there's a framework for conducting ecological restoration. So principle 2 of those draws on all types of knowledge, which includes TEK, and so it just talks about how this knowledge and practices are passed orally from generation to generation. And Monroe kind of already touched on all these, what TEK is, but it's just important that it's now a principle in the SER principles and standards. Next slide. Some of the work that I do that's related to Cristina's work and Monroe's work is the Eatney initiative. So Eatney is the buffalo, Blackfoot word for buffalo, and overall we're looking to align with the initiative and bring bison back to the land the Blood Tribe Land Management Department that I work for, and KEPA, Kenow Ecosystem Protection Association, are working together to bring the buffalo back to our Band Ranch, or Kenow Ini rangelands, which is shown here in the map in the north end of our blood reserve. So we're looking at putting in a small cultural herd as soon as early next year. We've been doing some baseline ecological and cultural assessments this past year as the grassland has been resting. So it's been exciting to get out on the land and really look at what's out there, and looking forward to monitoring those changes that happen as buffalo come on, and they're changing the landscape for the better, right? Okay, next slide. Okay, so for grassland restoration, we focus on traditional plants, and that's something important to our culture, because as in this quote says, everything is connected to the Blackfoot view, and what connects us are the Setsudeski's plants, flowers, as they were the first living things put here when the world was created. And that's Abit Somachka. He's our traditional knowledge holder on plants and a lot more things. He's William Singer. He's a part of KEPA, and in this picture here, you see us looking at all the sweetgrass in a garden bed box that we built. And part of our restoration project is putting sweetgrass back on the land in areas where it's been degraded, and community has brought that to our attention as one of the things that they're worried about, as climate change and threats of invasive species come on. How are we gonna hold our cultural practices the same way? And so this is what one of the things that we talked about with community is sharing sweetgrass from these beds, and more people are just wanting them in the yard departments as well. We also are restoring some cultivated land back to grassland using the community traditional knowledge input, and just doing what's best for the land. What Monroe was talking about, using TEK as that guiding knowledge piece of the best way to go about things that will restore the land and our culture as well. Next slide. In restoration, KEPA and our Blood Tribe Land Management Office are building capacity to restore and monitor grasslands with the help of community partners and guided by Blackfoot ecological values. You can see some pictures here of people from the parks, Kimberly Pearson and Amskapi Bagani, the knowledge holders from across the border. She's got a braid of sweetgrass there across her arms if you can't see it, but just gathering people who have these pieces of knowledge together to have a successful ecological and cultural restoration. Yeah, I think the last thing I wanted to say about that was just we're excited we're getting the buffalo back, one of our cultural indicators and ecological as well. And it won't be long before these ancestral relationships are back. They existed when Eni was on the land. So it's create a lot of new opportunities for healing and for healing on the land and for our community. Next.
Thank you, Kansie. I am now going to talk about the science. This TEK provides the framework and the background for the work that we're doing and really our guiding principles. And then at the end, Kansie and Monroe will join the presentation again to talk about next steps. So the image on the left is a historical photograph that shows Blackfoot setting fire on the prairie just outside of Waterton Lakes National Park. And it was taken in 1910. So these practices, there's also palynological evidence and archaeological evidence that shows that these practices of setting prescribed fires are ancient. It's something that Native people have been doing to manage prairie grasslands and also forest ecosystems throughout North America for millennia. Native people, we've engaged in these practices because our wisdom, our TEK, has shown us that these practices increase biodiversity and ecological resiliency. They create patchy landscape mosaics of plants to sustain wildlife. And so this has all been intrinsic to TEK. It's taken Western science until very recently to, to discover these sorts of relationships. I'm going to talk about the research that we've been conducting and on which I'm the PI. It started out as my doctoral studies and postdoctoral studies and beyond. It's long-term research. And we've been studying the relationships, the food web relationships between elk, bison, fire, and wolves in Aspen and Grassland communities. And basically, because of settler colonialism, Native people were prohibited from setting fires on the prairie that had been set over thousands of years. This caused in many places, such as in Waterton Lakes National Park, the aspen to take over the prairie. And there is abundant historical evidence in the form of photographs that show this, as well as palynological, so pollen core data that shows how drastically the cover has changed from being a grassland to dominated by forest. So Parks Canada in Waterton decided that they would return, they allowed wolves to return to this system, which is, as Monroe showed, is a powerful force of nature, that they would bring back fire. So they started setting prescribed burns. And in Waterton, these prescribed burns were rather legendary. I mean, these are large fires. They're 1,000 hectares or more in size. So this is quite a brilliant burning system, and it has been done systematically, starting with the White Camp Fire, which was supposed to be a much smaller fire, but it took off a bit, but stayed within the park. And this was actually a good thing. So every year we've been measuring the impacts of these fires on the plant communities and on wildlife activity, using a mix of very state-of-the-art Western science and traditional ecological knowledge. The Red Rock Fire is another large prescribed fire that burned what is called the Escarine Complex, and I'll show you a map of these in a little bit. April 2014, then reburned in 2017, and then the White Camp was reburned in May 2015 and will be reburned again this fall, I believe. So, or next spring, sorry. So the management objectives, of course, are to reduce aspen cover, restore Fescue Prairie in a biosphere reserve and World Heritage Site. And these plots have been sampled every year from 2007 to 2019. This year we were unable to sample them because of the virus. Management questions are, how is prescribed fire changing the extent of aspen cover, changing aspen demography, how are prescribed fires changing the grass community, and what are the most useful indicators to track fire effects over time? And how can we develop an effective long-term monitoring protocol? The dominant grasses in this system, this is one of the most intact grasslands in the world, and I have worked all over the world in many grasslands in places like Africa and Mongolia, and this is remarkable. It is a fescue grassland dominated by the grasses you see listed on this slide. Non-natives, there are some non-native species here, and they're Kentucky bluegrass, timothy grass, smooth brome, and sheep fescue. And we stratified our study site into the Escarine complex, Crooked Creek, which was our control site. It was not burned, and the Y camp. And then here's the blood timber limit, and within it is BB Flats, and these are all elk winter range. So some background here is Waterton fire history from 1833 to the current time. And you can see the Escarine complex in here and how it has burned. These fires are, this is all based on work that has been done in Waterton over the last 50 years to reconstruct the fire history using tree rings. So fire is part of this system. Then we had this very tidy multifactorial research design, and everything was going great. And then in 2017, the Kenow wildfire, technically a megafire, burned this whole landscape that we were studying, with the exception of the timber limit. And that created a whole other set of questions for us, such as how does prescribed fire compare to wildfire?
Cristina, just reminding you, you have about 5 minutes left.
Okay, so this is what happened after the fire. This is the fire in May 2018, and then the fire zone in August. For the methods, we used plots and transects, and in all plots and transects, we collected fire severity data. We focused on the prairie. We used geospatial mapping, and we did an elk and captive bison diet analysis. And we used citizen science and kind of First Nations community fellows. Here's our stratification in the Escarine complex, and you can, there's a summer bison paddock and a winter bison paddock, and then the White Camp Prairie and Crooked Creek, and you could see we have a large amount of plots and that they were resampled. Blackfoot Science, our TEK, we've incorporated Kainai Community Fellows since 2016, and we've had quite a lot of Kainai young people come through our program. And basically they are treated just like any field technician. So they learn all the methods and they're collecting real data. Our general results are that the Kenow wildfire burned the foothills parkland ecoregion with high to extreme severity, and it did not cause native grasses to erupt, and the proportion of native grasses stayed the same. And it significantly altered aspen stand structure, reducing the canopy, and that elk and bison diets were remarkably similar. Here's the fire severity results. We did a grass plot fire severity index and a fire severity index in the Aspen stands. And you can see that it was extreme in many sites. We had to add an extra category to reflect that. And we had a journal article published with these findings. In terms of the grass plot data, the change in cover type was astonishing. Basically 2016, we compared to 2018. 2016, the site had received prescribed fires only. 2018 is after the Kenow wildfire, and you can see the biggest shift is with the proportion of mineral soil. The shrub cover stayed the same. There was an eruption of soil stabilizing species like Chenopodium and Calamagrostis, and these are historic seed banks that had been buried for decades. The proportion of native grass by site stayed the same. The native grass species by site, the number of species dropped slightly. There was a reduction in biodiversity, diversity of grasses because of the Kenow wildfire. And non-native species by site and year stayed the same or were reduced. So there was not an eruption of non-native grasses as was expected. For mineral soil, yes, there was a lot of bare mineral soil after the fire, but the data we collected indicates that the proportion of bare mineral soil is decreased sharply last year. So the system is healing itself, as that picture with the wildflowers shows. Geospatial analysis using drone data and mapping with GPS, a Trimble, showed that the only significant change after the Kenow wildfire was the canopy. The mature aspen cover was reduced by a lot. So the green is before the Kenow wildfire. The red, which you could barely see, it's right here, is after the Kenow. That's all the canopy that was left, and there's little bits of it here and there. And we found one of the highest densities of sprouts post-Kenow wildfire ever reported in North America. So 481,000 aspen sprouts per hectare. This has subsequently dropped slightly as the system recalibrates after the Kenow wildfire. Okay, so now I'd like Kansie and Monroe to rejoin the conversation. And Kansie, if you could start by speaking about next steps for the Kenow Ecocultural Restoration Plan.
Sure. So in January of this year, before COVID, we had a workshop with the Kenow Community Parks, Cristina and some other stakeholders on an ecocultural restoration plan for the timber limits and other Kenow lands. So we're looking at, based on the soil analysis, prairie and grass plots, random subsample stratified by fire severity, plant secondary metabolite analysis in Aspen. So doing some work on the timber limit to restore those areas based on the data that was collected that Cristina talked about. Go ahead, Monroe.
Yes, and Monroe, if you could please speak about the project that you're working with me on, the BLM project for native seed and grassland restoration program in Fort Belknap, and what the outcome was this summer.
Our next steps is once the border lifts and COVID kind of dials back a bit, we're thinking of putting blood tribe elders and knowledge holders to go to for Belknap and kind of like integrate TEK from both Plains tribes and see what we can do for the program, because this year was just a pilot year and we've had our months and really looking for some feedback and just some brainstorming of new ideas on the TEK side. For the outcome from the pilot year was pretty awesome. It's different than what I've seen before in Waterton, and just the community there is it's pretty awesome. That's all I have to say.
I would like to add that we identified some amazingly intact prairie, and this is a mixed grass prairie and on the northern plains. And we were able to successfully collect some very robust collections of native prairie grass seeds, like green needlegrass, and a few others. And we had community fellows that were members of the Fort Belknap community, Indian community, and we provided jobs for them. I've hired 2 to continue next year as technicians on this project, as will Monroe as a senior technician. But what we're doing is applying traditional ecological knowledge in another prairie ecosystem and learning from what we discovered in Waterton, how to bring together TEK with state-of-the-art Western science. And the BLM and the Society for Ecological Restoration are incredible partners in this, and the Fort Belknap Indian community is just an astonishing community to work with. So with that, I think we're ready for questions. Here's the acknowledgements page.
Thank you, Cristina and Kansie and Monroe so much. We are going to run just a minute or 2 over time, but I didn't want to cut that off. We do have one question that's come in. So it says, as TEK prior to colonization was maintained orally from the perspective of the presenters, do the Blackfoot people intend to continue their oral traditions of passing on TEK combined with writing and otherwise physically documenting TEK in print and digital form for future generations?
I can start answering that, and then Kansie, maybe you could jump in. I sit on the PhD graduate committee of Mike Brucehead, and that is exactly what he is doing. He is decolonizing his education, his PhD, and his dissertation is about the traditional place names and the stories behind them in Waterton Lakes National Park. He's an elder in the Kainai First Nation. And so for his dissertation, he has received permission from the university, and this was very hard won, to present an oral, part of his dissertation will be oral, and it will be recorded, so people will be able to see that. But yes, the answer to your question is absolutely yes. It's challenging in a colonial world to do that from an academic perspective. Kansie, you can maybe talk about other ways that this is being done.
Yeah, so we ran into that all the time. You know, people are knowledge holders and elders aren't used to showing like written things, that information that's been passed down to them. So when we show them, give them questions, especially written form, they struggle, right? So you have to kind of put it in a way that they understand, and so the best way to document has been still orally and visually. We are using video to document and to share as well. But for sure, we're still taking down that information as we get out on the land and connecting the ecological information with the cultural, and that's how we put forth our best restoration practices.
Okay, thank you very much. As we close, I would like to thank our speakers, Cristina, Kansie, and Monroe, for taking the time to share their expertise with us today. I know if you were all present, we would all be applauding right now. And I'd like to thank our planning and tech team and to all of the participants, listeners, for joining us today. And we would love to have your feedback on how this presentation series goes this week, and we will be sending you an email survey later in the week that we'd like to see your responses on. And please be sure to tune in again tomorrow at noon Mountain Time to hear our Glacier National Park biologist Lisa Bate talk about raptors on the move. And thank you again.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.